Previously on Eric Mintel Investigates.
The most important eyewitnesses from start to finish, because not only did Walter Hout describe what happened, describing the aftermath of what happened.
Even as we separated them and are describing the memory characteristics of this nearly indestructible metal-like material.
Absolutely no other agenda except, isn't this the darndest thing?
And what Brazel dropped off was the actual material from the
Correct.
crash.
Correct.
How does the second crash feed into this, the one in Corona? Now, what's your take on that?
That they saw one walking at the crash site. There was a survivor.
So, Don, the survivor, whatever happened to that alien?
We now continue with Part 2, Children of Roswell.
My name is Eric Mintel. By night, I'm a professional jazz musician, but by even later at night, I investigate the paranormal. I, along with my team, travel the country investigating all things paranormal. This is Eric Mintel Investigates.
Don, last time we spoke, you said there was a live alien at the second crash site. So what happened to the alien?
From all accounts, we have even a number of ambulance drivers. We have talked, even Walter Hout had left a note, which we did not include in his CO statement, but he referred to, he was called Erwin Fortman. He was with the medical squad at that time. And he was a giant hulk of a man, 6'4", 250 pounds, John Wayne typish, that type. And they called him Tiny. And here was this note we found in Walter Hout's personal effects, where he refers to Tiny. And they also called him the Jewish boy. As they always like to, especially in the military, they like to label you as far as based, as far as even on your size for that matter. And so here was this handwritten note from Walter, Jewish boy, Tiny, brought bodies in through South Gate. Well, the South Gate, which was down on the far south end of the tarmac, they had the incinerators where they would typically burn as far as the base garbage. So it was generally considered, just an off, portion of the base proper. Nothing really happened there. It was the opposite end of the main gate. You had a east gate that went to the freight yards, and there was a west gate that they put in immediately after the incident that they would sneak out of town. Officers would slip out this newly created west gate, and they would slip to the west of Roswell to head up to Corona. They would dress up, then they would meet with guys with horse trailers, and they'd get on horseback dressed in ranch attire, and they'd go out and ride that particular pasture, that debris field site, still checking for remnants, pieces that would, raise to the surface, so after heavy rains.
They're undercover? They were undercover?
They were working undercover. We've had, until recent times, middle-aged servicemen who would be caught out there in Air Force Jeeps, Air Force trucks, men who are in their 40s and 50s as a first-class, private or a corporal. And we know they're not. And the one time they were caught, there was a Jeff Parker was a hired hand out there, and he pulls over this Jeep that just happens to be come bounding down the hillside from the debris field, and Bill has been out there himself a few times, so he knows the terrain. So there was a high-speed chase that would ensue, and they finally pull over. And he comes racing out, Parker comes racing out with his drawn Winchester, and this is private property. What are you doing out here? And they have all types of maps, on the Jeep dash and on the console between them. And the older of the two men, who just had a corporal stripe on his sleeve, was clearly in his 50s, according to Parker. And they claimed they were out there for the final establishment of a low-altitude radar tracking facility to track drug smugglers coming in from Mexico. Well, there's no such thing. And he didn't buy it and said, I don't care, it's still private property, get off of this ranch right now. And that's when the passenger said, by the way, you saw where we were. Is that where that UFO crashed back in the 40s? So, we're talking in recent years that they are still out there nosing around. They're still checking.
Here we are talking about Roswell after all these years. It's a fascinating story.
And as Bill knows, it's out in the middle of nowhere. There's absolutely no way.
Oh my God!
Directions.
You have to know where you're going to get there. You can't just stumble. That's like Dulce. When I was at Dulce, this car pulls up because I was with, the Hickory Apache. We're going to go up the hill, and this car says to us, "Oh, gee, we got lost. Where are we?" And so my guide says to me, he says, "You don't get lost out here because you can't find here." Right? And when you realize what that's like. But here's what I wanted to ask you, Don, because again, we crossed paths over this. That live alien crossed paths with the National Air War College class of 1948, and you spoke to the descendants of one of the members of that class who communicated with Marion Black Mac Magruder.
Precisely.
And Black Mac Magruder was no slouch.
He was a
This
triple
guy
ace.
helped win the Battle of Okinawa.
Right.
He brought radar night fighting techniques from the RAF to the United States
World War II, absolutely.
Marine Flying Corps, and actually saved our fleet off Okinawa from the kamikaze attacks because he was able to intercept them. This was Mac Magruder.
This was Black Mac.
Great story. You know that story, right, Don?
Yes. And he would then confide to 5 of his sons, independent of one another. As you mentioned, Bill, he was a member of the War College, class of 47-48. Now, these two are no slouches. They're all high-ranking officers, lieutenant colonels, full bird colonels, all being trained as far as in espionage, all being trained as far as in then going overseas and working as far as with international counterparts.
Yes, and policy and establishing military policy, because they're going to be the new leaders, the new war planners in the 1950s.
Right. And the fact that, and as the family was able to then track down and provide the documentation, because up till that point, we only had their secondhand testimony. Their father, it was just before he died in 1995, and describing that the War College was invited to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And they thought it was just going to be some training or some policy discussion of an international nature. And the next thing they know, they're being taken into a room, and there's this wreckage displayed as far as on atop this table. And they're asked to handle it, offer as far as their perspectives, their viewpoints, their opinions of what they believe this is. And he's describing the memory material over and over again, and that no matter what you did to it, it would just smooth right out, right from the grasp of your hand. And then they're taken to another room, and the lights come on, and there within a glass enclosure, a glass room, they see what clearly is a non-human entity. And they're told it is the survivor from the crash at Roswell, from New Mexico, just the year before. Now, the reason
that Mac Magruder said, He said what was so strange about this wasn't that it looked so different from human beings, it was that it looked so much like a human being, but you knew that it wasn't. And that's, he said, was the weirdest thing about it.
The weirdest thing, that it was humanoid, that it could, with the correct attire, it could pass on the street. But once you look into those eyes, you see as far as that disproportionately larger head, and you realize, my God, this is not human. The family was able to track down as far as the documents. So we have his actual assignment documents of April of 1948, that he was assigned as part of the War College to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Absolutely.
You can document he was there as he said he was. It was part of the War College. He was assigned there. It doesn't say he was there to observe, alien technology. No, of course not. Of course. But see, that's where colleagues, again, well, how come it doesn't describe, you have no idea as far as of military assignments. If you think that it's going to spell out for a word of what you're actually, you have no knowledge of military programs.
And the weirdest thing about that, in like the Sherlock Holmes moment, in the Sherlock Holmesian moment, because at the national military colleges, where junior officers go to be senior officers and make policy at those, they have to write dissertations, little theses.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so the theses coming out of that Air War College, this blew my mind. It was how to take nuclear weapons from strategic weapons and make them tactical weapons off airplanes. In other words, how to shoot down these things.
How to shoot these things down, right. In fact, as we know, and that's the great thing in New Mexico, that we also have the nuclear museum in Albuquerque. And you see the transition, you see the history, even where they were coming up as far as with mobile and as far as backpack nuclear launchers, that they were going out into the field. And it was just, so they were attempting to become more and more tactical. And this was years before the Soviets the Soviets would detonate their first bomb until August of '49.
That's right.
4 years.
And this was like years before the Korean War, when MacArthur, when General MacArthur, and this was the big fight, wanted to take those types of tactical nuclear weapons that came out of, that were described in those dissertations, and use them on the Soviet missile emplacements in North Korea. And when Truman said no, that's why they all had this big blow up and MacArthur got fired. It's amazing how much UFOs play into national policy over the years since 1947.
And doesn't it make, as far as, at least from a human perspective, all the sense in the world when you consider that New Mexico was the hotbed of all military research at that time? It's amazing how often, when I've been on college campuses, and you'll ask, even when the faculty members are present, you'll ask, where was the first atomic bomb detonated? And how many of them, well, of course, Japan. Well, it's like, no. How about New Mexico?
Right.
How about New Mexico? Where was the first atomic bomb squadron located? Well,
the 509s.
yeah, in Roswell.
Yeah.
Where were all the captured German V-2 rockets being launched? Over in White Sands, Alamogordo, New Mexico. Where was all the ongoing atomic research? Well, Los Alamos in New Mexico. So is it any wonder there were more UFO sightings in New Mexico than anywhere else in the world at that time?
And where was the biggest POW camp for German POWs? New Mexico.
In New Mexico, in fact.
Right, where all the Army officers were hiring the German captives to fix their diesel engines.
Operation Paperclip.
That's it.
And then one thing that we're investigating right now, and we have 2 former Paperclip on record before they passed away. So now we're talking more and more to the families. The fact that they risked bringing in some of Paperclip's best metallurgists to come into Roswell and examine the wreckage. Why would you talk about controversy, you talk about scandal. If the country would have been aware of the fact that we brought Nazi scientists into our country to assist and work with us as far as in the development and deployment of our own rocket program.
That's
And
right.
we
And
would
those
listen.
very same Nazi scientists communicated with the Nazi scientists over in the Soviet Union, and
Right.
that's why the Russians got their Sputnik first.
Yes. So, and the fact that they're also connected to Roswell.
Yes.
See, and so as a result, I mean, these armchair investigators who like to cherry pick, and well, then why was Paperclip involved? Why was the War College involved? Why did they transfer the wreckage from Roswell to Wright Field for foreign technology for analysis and breakdown and potential reverse engineering? I can't rewrite the history of what transpired thereafter. And why did Wright Pat hire Battelle Institute
Yes.
to develop their words, self-healing metal within weeks after Roswell?
Did you hear this one story that I heard from someone, a NASA scientist? I'm not going to mention his name because he swore me to silence.
Been there, yeah.
Who said, you've been there, who said you can comment on this, the J. Allen Hynek was shown that live alien and told, work with us, you get to know all you want to about this. And that's why after a Blue Book was shut down, because by the way, Trump's old lawyer, Roy Cohn, after it was shut down, that's when Hynek said, I'm going to really write about UFOs and talk about UFOs. It was the alien.
No, I can honestly say, for having worked with Hynek all those years, he never, for any of his other investigators or members on his board of directors, he never acknowledged that to us. And I asked his son, Paul, about that.
Oh, yeah, what did he say?
And Paul, who I would only run into at times at the Hynek residence, that his father was also very protective of getting the family in to the extent that it would jeopardize or threaten as far as their very lives. And so I know Hynek at one point, he was at a book award ceremony in Ohio. And his private secretary at that time, Jenny Zeidman, who just passed away last year, they were sitting at a table, and all at once, someone else brought up all his work with Blue Book, and if he ever heard or saw anything at Wright Pat that he could then describe. And he pleaded his ignorance, that they pretty much shielded him from all the hard data, the hardcore reports that were coming in. But then he slipped over a handwritten note to Jenny, in which he had written, Air Force claims they have a captured UFO. So then Jenny goes in her purse and she gets a little piece of paper and she writes, who told you this? And she slips it over, and Alan writes and slides it back over, AF, Air Force. So the Air Force, according to Hynek, according to Jenny Zeidman, the Air Force had confided that they had a crash. Okay? So what are we hearing now as far as more and more, whether it was Harry Reid, whether it was Christopher Mellon, and others who are talking as far as in regards to the Navy pronouncements in recent months, that we've raised the ante. We're now talking about crash retrievals. We're talking about physical wreckage in hand. We have physical evidence.
Yeah, there was there was some kind of like story, I think, in the New York Times recently that they acknowledged with like finding off-Earth vehicles.
And so then on his annual Father's Day interview, Don Jr., the very last question he brings up with his father, President Trump, is about Roswell. And the president making the comment, I'm sure you both are aware of this, the president making the comment that I'm asked that question probably more than anything else. What's the truth about Roswell? And that millions of people are interested in this. And I know, many people go to Roswell because they want to go there where this actually happened. And then his son presses again, well, are you going to ever release anything on Roswell? To which his father then says, I'm going to have to think on that. The point being, Here it is now 73 years later, and there's still a there. There's something still to disclose. There's still a truism to still pronounce, to still present.
Right. Donald Trump said he would think about it. Hillary Clinton said she would tell the truth if it didn't reveal sources and methods. Jimmy Carter said he would tell the. In fact, I actually asked Jimmy Carter at a book signing.
Oh, you did have that opportunity, Bill. Good.
I saw him when he was doing his latest book,
Right.
and this is obviously before the cancer and everything else. And so I'm sitting with him, and so we all know the story about I'm going to tell the truth about UFOs because I
Right.
UFO. I filed a report. I'm going to tell the
Governor of
truth.
Georgia, right.
And then the story of who walked into the Oval Office to shut that down. My guess is Zbigniew Brzezinski, because he had been a Jason scholar, and the MJ-12 people were under the Jason scholar, so it would have been Zbigniew Brzezinski because he was so close to Jimmy Carter. I actually sent Mika a letter saying, what did your father ever tell you? But I got nothing. So I asked him, I said, is it true that somebody walked into the Oval Office and said, you can't even tell the truth? And Jimmy Carter, who was smiling at people, the color just drained from his face and he just shook his head.
You weren't supposed to know that.
I wasn't supposed to know that.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it goes.
Shook his head, no.
It goes back to Nixon too. I mean, Nixon wanted to reveal all the UFO information and hired a documentary crew focusing on the Holloman Air Force incident.
Well, and what people also don't, they so quickly dismissed Nixon because of Watergate. But who was Chief of Staff of the Army in 1947 when this all happened? Well, Dwight Eisenhower. So Eisenhower would have known, everything and
it goes
all
back.
things about Roswell. And who was, when Eisenhower became president, who was his VP for 8 years? Richard Nixon.
Right.
And who was living in Washington in the summer of 1952 when the flying saucers came over, and who was on the deck of the USS FDR in Operation Mainbrace when a USO flew out of the water.
That's
and
right.
told the bridge crew, shut up about this.
That was Ike. That was
It
Eisenhower.
was Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes, yeah. I can't encourage that of the young ufologists more than ever. You need to study your history. You need to see where we've been to know why we are where we are.
Why did Eisenhower structure an open skies agreement with Khrushchev after the Holloman Air Force Base meeting? They gave him the idea.
They gave them an open sky, in other words.
Open skies idea.
Yeah.
Leave us alone, we'll leave you alone.
Right.
Well, Don, I tell you, your research, Bill, your research, it's just like an onion. It's constantly being peeled, and there's all new layers of information and all new witnesses coming forward all the time. So no wonder you don't have the answers then, because people are coming back now with a lot more information. And plus with the technology now, I'm sure we've got, files and things like that are being uncovered, the Freedom of Information Acts and everything. But what I want to ask you, Don, too, was you working with Alan Hynek. What was that like?
Oh, I could not have had a better teacher. Talking about role model.
Yeah.
And yet, as humble as he was, and as he was their resident skeptic, as their chief scientific consultant, and he was the one that had to always go before the press microphones and explain, each particular Air Force investigation in prosaic terms and conventional terms. But he was enough of a scientist that he realized there was fire behind all the smoke. He realized that the hardcore cases, as I said earlier, were not brought to his attention. They were going upstairs, and upstairs being Washington, being the Pentagon. And why did he stay with the program? Well, maybe he knew more than he ever confided, but it was also he wanted access. He wanted to be in the race if there ever was a finish line. He wanted to be there, and he didn't want to cut himself off. And as it turns out, what was quite evident, they didn't cut him off. They kept him on a short leash, even after Blue Book was shut down. And we came up with this because we were able to demonstrate with all the documents, which Hynek had hidden for us to discover and locate, after he had passed away in 1986. that after Blue Book folded, actually in January of 70, we say December of 60, no, it was actually January of 70 that was official. They kept Hynek on for the next 4 years as his job description was consultant on controversial aerial phenomena. And it was through this time, Foreign Technology Division. Well, that's where the Roswell material went, FTD. FTD is where whenever they, for all the German technology after World War II, or whenever they recovered a Russian MiG, that's where it would go for analysis and breakdown. See how this thing ticks. And so that's exactly where the Roswell material went.
It does. And the funny thing was that Phil Corso's boss was a Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau. In Arthur Trudeau's own notes, called A Diary of an Engineer, because he officially was in the engineering, the Corps of Engineers.
Right.
Then he went to G2. But in his diary, he describes this, that that when he's posted to Army R&D, and there's a foreign technology desk that's basically empty, he goes to Strom Thurmond, and he asks Strom Thurmond, he says, there's a lot of technology that's been not invented here, and he kind of hint, we found it in Roswell and this, and so Strom Thurmond comes back and says, I will give you money for that, to reverse engineer that. You will get a big budget for that as long as you don't say it came from Roswell. Say it's just NIH, not invented here. And all throughout Trudeau's bio, he's talking about the NIHs that he brought into, that he had Corso bring to American industry for funding from the Senate, but he never says UFO.
If anybody were to ask you today, who has the physical evidence? Where is it today? What would your answer be?
I would say it's still at Wright Field, still at Wright-Patterson.
Okay. Most of our informers at Wright-Pat, and we're talking originally General Arthur Exon, who was base commander in 64, Colonel Jeffrey Thau, who was a deputy commander at Wright-Pat. He's a dear close friend of mine. He's president of his own aerospace company now in Dayton. From all indications, and we had a full bird colonel tell us this, that they pretty much cleared everything out by the early 80s because they were in the heart of the city of Dayton. And as he would put it, we were having a hell of a time keeping, as far as secrets, right in the middle of downtown Dayton.
So you write the government and say, tell us what you have on UFOs. We don't have anything on UFOs.
And they can honestly say they don't.
Don and Bill, this has been, again, another mind-blowing episode here. Just so many great stories. And for the last couple of minutes here, Don, and Bill, too, talk about where you have any appearances coming up. I know with the social distancing thing going
Everything's canceled, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Life is canceled.
We're
just staying in bed. They dressed for your camera.
Oh, man.
If I could add, we do have 2 books that are currently out. Yeah. We have the Roswell Chronological Pictorial, as far as it's a full color, 280-some page book, the whole chronology, the faces, the names, the people, minute by minute, day by day, week by week, year by year, up to the present. And then we also have the book Roswell, the Ultimate Cold Case File Closed. So we presented
That's excellent. I love that.
Day in Court. Our day
Excellent.
in court. And so both at Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com. So
I want to thank you both for being here. Bill, as always, thank you. Don, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We've got a lot more guests coming on the show, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Bill.
Stay safe, everybody.
All right.
Stay safe. Right.
Thanks, Don.
Okay, we'll do it again.
Absolutely.